Hi everyone, it's Gary here from Echidna Sewing, and today we're going to be looking at overlockers, and in particular I'm going to show you the incredible features on the Juki MO-2000QVP. Now, this is one of my favorite overlockers and certainly one of our best sellers. But first, before we dig into that, we'll just talk a moment about overlockers. For anyone who has had one over the years since they've been out, you've probably experienced all the frustrations of threading and the usability features on many of the machines that have come before this. And that's what's going to make this demonstration really exciting, because you're going to see just how easy it is to thread and use an overlocker that has the right sort of features. The Juki brand, before we go on, is a incredible product. Juki is one of the world's largest manufacturers of industrial sewing machines, and certainly overlockers fall into kind of that crossover category. They generally came from the industrial market anyway, and Juki do a fantastic job. They've been around since the late 1940s, and certainly, as I said today, are one of the big manufacturers in the world, a Japanese company, and they do really make a terrific product. The MO-2000QVP is their top of the range overlocker, so it has the features that will support that. And in particular, the amazing jet air threading system, which means you can thread these things very easily. You don't have to sit there with tweezers and stand on your head and look for little guides and so on. It does it all for you. So I'm going to show you that in just a few moments. But before we do, we're going to go through a run through on just what an overlocker does first. So if you're new to overlockers, let's talk about that for a minute. And the most common overlocker in the market today is what we call a 3/4 thread mock safety stitch. And that's what this is. So you'll see it has 4 threads on the top. 2 of those threads are your needle threads. 2 of those threads are looper threads. And we'll talk about loopers in a moment, but we all know what needles are. So an overlocker has typically 2 needles, and you can use it with either 2 or 1 needle. And we'll cover that in a few moments as well. Running through this particular machine, a few of the basic features. You'll see it has a little LCD panel here, and that is fantastic because it gives you all the different stitch types you can do. And believe it or not, this overlocker has 15 different stitch types that you can use, and it's very easy to set. So once you choose the number that you want, you just follow the guides here and set all the different functions on the machine to the guides or to the levels that it says on that screen. So that's nice and easy. The machine comes with the lovely little fabric catch or waste catcher. That's standard, and pull this apart and you'll see opens up nice and easily. It has all the onboard tools here, screwdriver for changing the needles, tweezers if you do need to use them, a little lint brush, and a pack of needles. Now, great feature about this machine is it uses a standard flat back universal needle. So needles are really easy to get. You don't have to buy any special type of needle. Universals are available everywhere in all the different sizes. We're going to get into this in a few moments, but first I'm just going to close that back up, put our little catcher back in there, and we're going to run a bit of fabric down through the machine and just talk about what the stitch that it creates. Now this is all threaded, and in a few moments I'm going to unthread it and thread the whole thing from start. Obviously it has a foot control. It plugs into the side of the machine here, and I've got this set as it comes out the box in its most standard setting for a 4-thread overlocker. I have 2 pieces of fabric here, just a simple homespun type product, and this is the most common application. You're going to take 2 pieces of fabric and you're going to seam them together with this 4-thread machine. So let's run that down. You'll see as I'm doing this, there's a little cutting blade just here. So again, if you're new to overlockers, this is what it does. There's a blade there that actually cuts the fabric, and it goes up and down. Might even just turn that around a bit. Perhaps that will look a bit better. And that's the blade doing its job there. So you need to be mindful on an overlocker that there is a blade, and it is sharp, and it does cut fabric. So if you stick anything under there, it's going to try and cut it. And so keep your fingers away, although it would be almost impossible to get your finger caught in there. But let's just finish that seam. And these are a smooth overlocker. Now, when you get to the end of a seam, unlike a sewing machine, you can just keep running the fabric out because it does what we call a chaining stitch, so it chains the thread out through the machine. And I might just turn that around a little bit again so we can see that. So as we come through, you'll see the thread just continues to form an overlock stitch, even though it isn't on any fabric. Now you've got a couple of ways of trimming that. You could, of course, pick up a pair of scissors and cut the thread at this point. There is also a little cutting device at the back of the machine just here, and you can pull that up and cut it in there. But here's a little tip, and I've been doing this for 40 years, and I tell you, it's saved me a lot of time. I always just bring my thread around and cut it back under the foot like that. And that's the easiest way to do it. And there we have it. So that is what a standard 4-thread overlock stitch looks like. And that's set perfectly. Perfect tension, perfect stitch. And when you open that out, your seam is beautiful on the outside. So it makes it a whole lot easier when you're constructing a garment, particularly on knit fabrics, etc., that you don't need to use your sewing machine at all. In fact, a lot of people will make a lot of garments and never even touch a sewing machine. They'll do it all on an overlocker. So that's what a 4-thread mock safety stitch looks like. And now we might dig in deeper into the machine and have a look at how this machine threads. Okay, so now we're going to get in and have a really good look at the threading, and because that is the number one thing that people like to see, you know, how easy is this overlocker to thread? It's got loads of other features. We're going to touch them a little later, but we're going to dig into threading straight away because it's so important. Now, as I said, this machine is already threaded, and you've just seen me run a bit of fabric through it. So I'm going to do what most people would absolutely freak out at, and I'm going to cut all the threads up here, every one of them, and I'm going to run those threads through the machine until they're all gone. I have now taken all the thread out. It is completely unthreaded, and I know a lot of people would go, what have you done to me? In fact, we have people come into our store sometimes. They actually bring their overlockers in just so we can thread them. Which is fine. We're always happy to do that. If you are one of those people and you'd like us to do that, we'll do it for you for sure. There's no charge on doing that. But you don't need to. If you've got a machine like this, you can thread it yourself. So let's have a look. All unthreaded. I'm going to take the waste catcher off because we need to get rid of that. I'm going to open up the machine now, and we're going to look at the looper threading first, because that's the area that most people really struggle with. And you can see we've got our looper mechanisms there. We've got this little arm here, which is the engaging lever for the air threading. You've got a little button here, which is the air threading button. So how do we do this? If we turn that wheel, you'll see that the machine does turn over. You can see the loopers turning over here, the needles going up and down. But I want to show you a very important thing. On the end of this wheel, you do have that arrow that indicates which way you should turn the wheel. So you always turn the wheel in that arrow direction there. And that's important because to engage the air threading, we just need to, first of all, lift this lever to the up position and then turn the wheel slowly until it locks into place. And you'll feel it. It will lock, and you'll know that it's ready to use the air threading. It also shoots across the little air threading tubes here. And in fact, I can't turn the wheel now. So we're good to thread. Now, this is where I suggest you do need a pair of tweezers. I find it easier to use tweezers because thread gets sticky and staticky and gets stuck to your skin. So we're going to thread, I'll thread the blue thread first, and I'm going to pull that thread down there. Now you'll notice that I'm using blue because it corresponds with the blue indicator on the upper looper. And this tension here is the upper looper. There is actually a little guide up there that says upper looper as well. And all you'll do is you'll follow the path. There is a little threading lug down the back there. That's easy to see. You won't miss that. And then we just come down here. Now, you also should always thread the machine with the presser foot in the up position, because when the presser foot is up, it means that the tension mechanisms are open and the thread can go into the tension system correctly. If you don't, often what will happen is the thread sits on top of the tension, and when you start sewing, you don't have any tension. And that applies to sewing machines too, folks. So some overlockers on the market, however, don't have a tension release system. So it should be a question you ask, because you really do need to have a tension release system on an overlocker. So we follow the blue indicators here, and that will come down into here. And of course, the book has all the instructions. It's a fantastic book, and there's loads of other Juki videos on our website that show you this as well. So I generally pull enough thread through to do this. So like, you know, I go to about 10 inches of thread, and I then just cut the edge so it's really nice and sharp. Now you then take the thread that you've got and you put it into this little hole here. And it really is, it's a fairly large hole. It's easy to get into, but this is where I suggest tweezers are better, because the static on your fingers will often stop the thread from going down there. So we just push that thread into there, and you only need to get it down about 1/2 inch really, or 1 inch. And once that thread's sitting there, being careful not to have it caught anywhere else. I've got it caught around that little brush there, that was silly of me. I just leave the thread sitting there. Now, this is magic. So the thread's in the little hole, there's my upper looper, and watch what happens when I push this button. The thread has now shot through the machine and has now come out through the looper, and that is now threaded. So how cool was that? We'll replay that and you'll see it's amazing. Okay, so we now have the upper looper is threaded. Now it's time to thread the lower looper. And again, the same rules apply. We just hook that into the little guide below there and down through there into this little guide here. Whoops. Again, this is where tweezers are kind of handy because you can get in there easier. Pull enough thread through. And again, I cut a nice clean end on the thread and I just use my tweezers and I tuck that thread into the little hole there. You really want it to go down about 1/2 inch to 1 inch. That's usually enough. Make sure it's not going to get caught anywhere here. So if we hit that, watching here, ready, watching? There it is, threaded. There is the loopers. Pink one's done, blue one's done, loopers are threaded. Once we've done that, we need to disengage the air threading mechanism. And to do that, you just simply push this lever back down. That's it. They're all done and dusted. We can close that up. Now, before I do, I generally leave about 3 or 4 inches of thread just hanging there. I'm not worried about pulling it back up through the needle plate and out through the back of the machine. Some people will tell you to do that. I've never done that, never had an issue. And it works fine. So now that that's all done, I'm going to close that up. We're going to close this up and we're going to now have a look at how you thread the needles. Okay, so let's take a look at the needle threading, and I'm just going to move the machine around a little bit so you can get a better view. And obviously this has got 2 needles in here. You'll also notice when you look at an overlocker, typically, pretty much every overlocker I can think of, the right needle always sits lower than the left needle. A lot of people often ring us and go, I can't get my needle up all the way, but that's because they're not supposed to be even there. Actually, the left is higher than the right needle. It's always important that you insert those needles all the way too when you're replacing. If they're not in correctly, then you'll cause some grief, and that's not really what we want. So this machine has an auto needle threading device, and not many overlockers actually have auto needle threaders, but it's not quite as simple as the jet air threading. You do have to pull a lever down, a bit like a sewing machine really. So it's quite clever and very, very efficient. So same rules apply. We take the, in this case I've got a yellow thread, which we just pop in underneath the guide there. Sorry if I'm in your way. Again, I've got my presser foot in the up position still, so the tension mechanism is open. And we just follow the guide here. There is a little threading diagram, I'm pretty sure, down on here. So if you get stuck, that's all on the inside cover there. And we just simply go under here. This is the green dot, so we're going to go through to the green slot there. And there are 2 little, I'm going to move that down a wee bit. There are 2 little like pigtail guides here, one on the right, one on the left. And what we do there is hook that up into there. In fact, it goes up there first. So it comes through there, into this guide here, over to that pigtail, and then we need to thread the right needle. Now, to thread the needle on the wheel of the machine, there is a little raised area that and there's a little line on the end of the wheel, on the end of the casing. So you need to make sure that that little raised area there is level with that line. And all that does is it means that the needles are now in the correct position for using the auto threader. So at this point, we know the machine's in the correct position. I do want to thread the right needle first, and there's a little lever here, right there, and there's an arrow left and right, so we push that to the right, and then we just simply pull this down and engage it, and then using your tweezers, hook your thread into the little fork here. We'll try and get a close-up of that and show you, but it just sits there like that, and then we just raise that lever, and that's now pulled the thread through the needle and I just use my tweezers. Got a big long tail there, I'll cut that off. And that is now my right needle threaded. So I didn't have to go looking for the needle eye, which is kind of good. And the last one, I'm going to take this white thread and we'll just hook that in under there. Again, I don't want to get in the way, but it's pretty hard to avoid sometimes. Again, my presser foot is in the up position, so my tension is open. We're under there, under there. This is the little grey indicator here. There's the same indicator. And then not only have they used colours, but they've also used shapes. So this is a pentagon, a square, a triangle, and a circle. So this is the actual pentagon. And we just pop that into the top level there. Again, over into that section, into the little pigtail on the right. Make sure that my wheel is in the correct position. And this time we flick this little lever up to the left, and then we engage the the needle threader. And then using our tweezers, we just simply hook that in under there and then lift that. And of course, grab your tweezers and pull that thread through. And there are both my needles threaded. My upper looper is still sitting there. And at this point, I usually cut down to about 3 or 4 inches. Now, here's one of the best tips I use. And again, it's almost foolproof. If you take a piece of fabric now, after you've threaded the machine, remember the stitching hasn't formed yet. We've got our lower looper thread hanging down here. It's not in the way, it's not being caught by anything. We've got our upper looper thread, the blue thread, just sitting out on top of the foot. And we've got our 2 needle threads sitting out on top of the foot. And a lot of people will tell you to do this. They'll make you poke those threads down through the feet and hold them when you start sewing. Well, here's my tip. Again, I've been doing it for 40 years. It's never failed me, is I simply put a bit of fabric. We'll just open that out. I might end up using this piece of fabric again. I simply put a piece of fabric under the foot, put my foot down, and following the direction on the hand wheel, I just turn that over 3 or 4 times, just to make sure that the stitches are all forming correctly. And then I start sewing. And lo and behold, it's stitching perfectly. Now, again, when you're trimming the thread, as I mentioned before, you can come out the back, you can use some scissors, you can use the guide up here, or my favorite is just come around and sew it back under the foot, and that trims it off. And there we have our perfect stitch. And as you can see, threading this machine, super easy, both for loopers and for needles. Okay, so let's have a look at a few of the other key features that that are on this overlocker, and indeed found on many overlockers, or most overlockers. First one we're going to touch on is the blade system and how you would adjust the width. So the question that begs is, why would you adjust the width of the cutting blade? Well, that will really depend on the fabric you're stitching on. So if you're on a really open weave woven fabric, then you want a fairly wide cutting width. Otherwise, you'll find that the whole seam could fall out of the fabric. And to adjust the cutting width, it is just a matter of turning this little dial. The book tells you all the sizes that you can go from. In fact, the book is very good. It really does explain in quite plain English how to actually do this. But you can go from around about a 3mm cutting width up to, I think, about a 9mm cutting width. And so when you turn this, I might just open this up again here. When you turn this, this whole cutting blade assembly moves to the right or back to the left. And so it is important to set that to the fabric that you're about to sew on. But generally speaking, you'll set it at the 2.5 setting, which is kind of standard. Now, how do I know that? Because if I choose stitch number 1 on the panel up here, which is the standard 4-thread safety stitch, or mock safety stitch rather, it tells me that my cutting width should be set between 1 and 5. So for me, I'm going to go 2.5 is pretty good. That's kind of the middle. And the reason it says between 1 and 5 is because you do have control of that, and it will depend on the fabric, but I would start at 2.5 as a pretty standard setting. And you'll see that it can go right in narrow, which we might use if we were doing rolled hemming and so on. We'll talk about that a little later. So we'll just go back to 2.5. There it is. It's also telling me that my tensions should be on 4. So you'll see that all the tensions here are set at 4, which is how it will come out of the box. And this screen will tell you where to set those, each one independently for whatever stitch it is you're choosing. That's a great feature because you don't have to dig into the book, and it just means you don't have to think too hard. Just follow the instructions here. So for standard fabrics on a 4-thread mock safety stitch, I've got my blade set. It's telling me that my stitch length should be on the 2.5, and in fact there is a little marker on the side of the machine. We just quickly turn that around a bit. Little marker there that shows you the stitch length setting is 2.5 for most things. And this is the differential feed. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but it has an N setting, which is essentially neutral. So currently that's where I'm going to leave it because that's what it's telling me to set it at here. The next little guide here is the rolled hem finger or the chaining finger that's on the needle plate. Now, a lot of overlockers, to convert from normal overlocking to rolled hemming, you've actually got to add an attachment or you've got to change the plate. This one you don't. You just simply flick this lever. Currently, it's saying flick the lever forward for normal sewing, and currently it is flicked forward. But if I was converting this to rolled hem, for instance, I would flick it back like that, and it will tell me to do that here. So right now, I'm just going to leave it where it was. And this one here is a curious one. It's what we call a looper or a spreader device. So I can actually run this machine without the upper looper thread, sorry, by using this little device here, which I can engage or disengage. And that's what this is saying. So it's saying for the setting we have at the moment, leave this set to the right. And that's where it is. So I'm going to leave that. And it's also saying right around here that the blade should be locked in the up position. And that's what I want to quickly show you. That blade, if we turn the wheel, you'll see the blade moves up and down. But if I was to flick this little lever around, right there, that's now disengaged the blade and it's not moving at all. That's only for certain situations where you don't want to cut the fabric. You might be doing a rolled hem or a blind hem or something and you just don't want to cut fabric. You just got to be mindful, if you set that to there, you can't run any excess fabric into the machine because it will jam up in the loopers and you'll have all sorts of problems. And that applies to every overlocker on the market. If you don't have the blade set, you'll jam up your machine if you're not careful. So you won't use that very often, but you can disengage the blade. When you put that back into position, the blade will automatically re-engage again. There we go. So that's all set. Okay, so that's your cutting width. We just talked about how you would use these guides here to set all your tensions and so on. And I should point out that changing your tension is just a matter of turning that around. But you know what? Most of the time you're going to leave that on 4. And you're more likely to have to change that if you're using different threads and so on. And again, follow the instructions that this machine tells you and you'll always have a great starting point. As you build a bit of experience on overlockers, of course, using different types of threads, you do tend to work out that. And of course, we're always here to help you and support you if you have any questions about tensions. But these guys are really foolproof. Just follow the instructions and they'll work. So that's the cutting device. I do want to talk about the differential feed because that's one of the questions people always ask. They say, does that model have differential feed? And yes, pretty much every overlocker now has differential feed. And then I say to people, now, do you know what differential feed does? And they go, no, I just know that I have to have it. You do have to have it, every overlocker has it, but you don't always use it. And I'm going to explain exactly what differential feed is. I'm going to take the machine around here and I'm going to lift the presser foot. And in fact, I'm even going to take the presser foot off for a minute because it's easy to take off and you can get a whole heap of different presser feet for this machine, from elasticating and blind hemming and cording and beading and all sorts of things. But to take the presser foot off, we just lift the foot. There's a little black lever just back under here. Just pop that. It's a bit like a sewing machine. And lift that right up and you can now remove that whole foot. Now I'm just going to leave the thread sitting there, but I want you to have a look at what differential feed is. And for this one, I'm going to zoom in really, really close to the 2 sets of feeders here. If you've ever sewn, you know that all sewing machines and all overlockers have what we call feed teeth, and here they are. But on a differential feed overlocker, you actually have 2 sets and they work independently of each other. So if I turn this wheel, even though there's thread there, it's not going to get in any trouble. It's just going to keep forming a chain. Both these sets of feed teeth are currently feeding at the same rate. I'm even going to take the stitch length up quite high so you can see it quite drastically. feeders come up, and now they are feeding the fabric through, and then they drop down again as the needles come into the work. And that's what feeders do. And of course, they're working against the bottom of the presser foot to feed the fabric. Now, differential feed means that I can alter the ratio. So I can tell the machine to make the front feed more or less than the back feed. And to practically show you that, I'm now going to tell the front feed to feed more. So I'm going to raise the number on the differential feed, and I'll quickly turn that around and show you. So there's the differential feed dial there. So I've taken that from neutral all the way around to 2, and we'll see what that does. Back to there. And there we go. Now watch the front feed as we turn this wheel, and you'll see if I do it slow enough, the front feed is coming up way further forward now, and it's actually feeding twice as much fabric as the back feed. So in other words, we're feeding more fabric into the machine than is coming out of the machine, and that means that we're going to gather the fabric. So I'm going to show you practically what that will do in a few moments. If I went to the other direction, if I changed it right down to 0.7, now what we've done is we've now made the back feed more than the front feed. So that will have a tendency to want to stretch the fabric, and so that's often very good on fabrics that tend to want to pucker up and pull. Like a lot of knits do that sometimes, but more often it's light woven fabrics that cause that problem. So turning the differential feed to 0.7 will actually correct a lot of those issues with certain fabric types. So that's what differential feed is. It's not anything, scientific. It's just a simple process of changing the way the feeders actually work. So let's just pop this foot back on, and to do that we just need to get that in under there, lift the foot a bit higher, just access that, and there is a little spring that has to sit up on that part of the foot just there, and once that's in place, just lower the foot down and push the little lever at the back, and that will now lock into position, and that's all there is for changing the feed. So let's have a look at what that differential feed might do. So here's a little example that I've stitched of using the differential feed. So what we have here is a piece of fabric on top and this gathered piece into the top piece. It's a bit like the skirt onto a bodice or something. So if you've ever done any gathering, you'll know what I'm talking about. But how did we actually do that? I simply took my stitch length, left it at neutral. I think I had it on neutral, a little bit higher. I went to 3, I think. And I took my differential feed to 2, which is the maximum gathering. Now, if I take 2 pieces of fabric, exactly the same length, and I start sewing that. Now, just make sure everything's set. I haven't changed anything. It's all good. I'm going to start that into the machine. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to gently hold the top piece of fabric, and I'm going to let the bottom piece get dragged through. Now remember, they started at the same length. But they didn't come out the same length. So that was, in effect, the differential feed actually pulling that bottom piece through because it was set at a higher rate. And I can even get little spreader devices that will actually enhance that amount of gather. So differential feed can be used for that. But here's another interesting example. Here's a piece of fabric I stitched before. You'll notice one seam is perfectly flat. The other seam is quite fluted. And again, that's differential feed at play. So if I stitch this through the machine again, and this is a fleecy, so it is quite a lot of stretch in it. If I stitch this through on neutral, without doing anything to it, let's see what happens. So we'll take this side here and we'll stitch that down there. Now I'm just letting that feed through under its normal way, but you can see that still has quite a fluted type of effect. It's certainly not flat. Now I'll turn my differential feed to, we'll go all the way up to almost 2, and we'll see what happens now. I'll stitch that same side through without me doing anything other than adding differential feed. and now it's curled. So we've gone from a fluted effect to almost a pulled effect like that. And so having differential feed and it being variable, you can eliminate a lot of those natural tendencies of fabrics to stretch and pucker and do all sorts of things. It takes a little bit of getting practice, you know, getting the right setting, but that's what you do on an overlocker. You keep all the different scraps of fabrics you've got and you play and you learn as you go. So that's that. And that really covers most of the main features on the machine. This does have a rolled hem feature, of course. Rolled hemming, for instance, would be, we could go to number 7 or 8. So let's see what we would do to set up for rolled hemming, because that's probably the most commonly, the common sort of other type of stitch that people use. So all we need to do is choose the one we want, and I'm pretty sure 7 is the one we're going to want to use. So we'll go to number 7. You'll see that number changes there. And that's telling me we're going to use the right needle. So this L and R means left or right needle. Right needle, that means we've got to take the left needle out. So how do we do that? We just simply grab the little screwdriver that is in the kit. I'm going to trim back the left needle thread. And what I do is I just cut it there and I just leave it there because it's not going to get into any trouble there. And now I'll take my tweezers and I'll grab that right needle out of the needle eye and I'll just trim that away. I don't want that there anymore, so that's gone. And I need to take the right needle out. So to take the left needle rather, I keep saying the wrong needle, sorry about that, sorry to confuse you. It's the left needle we're taking out. So the screwdriver, we just undo the left needle screw and just keep held of the needle, take it out, put it somewhere where you can reuse it because that needle's still fine. Now, I do suggest at this point, just nip that screw back up a little bit. Don't over tighten it, just a gentle nip, because if you don't, that needle, that screw could work loose, vibrate loose and fall out, and then you'd lose it, and then you'd have to get another one, and it's just inconvenient more than anything. So we've now taken that needle out. We now look at this, we want our stitch length on 1, so that's around here on the dial here. We go to 1. We want our differential feed on neutral, so that's the N. And here's the little chaining finger I spoke about earlier. It's saying now it should be down or forward, so we flick that way. Our upper looper spreader needs to be left in the right position, and our blade is still engaged. But let's look at our tensions. This is where it changes a little bit. So we want the green or the square tension to be on 4.5. We want the triangle or the blue tension to be on 4, which it is, and we want the pink round circle tension to be on 5. So that's a starting point, and generally it's pretty good. Now I'm just using normal overlocking thread, but for rolled hemming, often you'll use a decorative thread, sometimes embroidery thread works, but what we call bulked nylon or a non-spun thread, and it gives you a great effect. So let's have a look at what we're going to get now. We'll just pull that thread through. Now this is on just a little bit of homespun using standard thread, so we'll pull that out and have a look at what we get. It's not the best thread for doing a rolled hem on, but you can see it's a very different stitch to what we had over here, isn't it? And let's do that on a fabric that might lend itself more to a rolled hem. Often nice little knit fabric, so this is just a lycra. Let's see what happens here. Now, because we're on a small stitch length, we want to make sure we get that thread all started. And sometimes you want a fluted effect anyway, so in fact, that's a really nice looking stitch. So let's sew that all the way through. And there we have a lovely little fluted rolled hem. Of course, they're different coloured threads, and if you had the same colour thread, you'd get a perfect effect. Now, if you didn't want all that flute, that's when you could turn your gathering effect on. So let's have a look and see on the differential feed if we get a different type of stitch here. Probably get our stitch length down a wee bit more, maybe that's gone too far. but you can see we've got nowhere near as much fluting there by using our differential feed. Again, if you were using on your top looper thread what we call a bulked nylon or a woolly nylon or a decorative thread, you'd have this lovely satiny looking cover, and it really is a stunning finish, and it's a great way to finish the bottom of dresses and shirts and all sorts of things where that type of effect is what you're looking for. So that's how you set up to rolled hem. It's really not that complicated. And again, little tip, just pull that around there and that will cut off under the blade for you. So how do we convert it back? It's simple. We just grab the needle that we had, and what's even more important is you've got a little needle inserter with this guy that comes standard. So just get remember I said there's a mark on the side of the hand wheel for setting your, for threading your needles. It's a good idea to get that mark set in the correct position there as well. And grab your little screwdriver, which I've put there, undo that screw a few turns. Don't undo it too far because you'll take it out and they're very small. And if you drop it, you'll probably lose it. You don't want that. Now, this little needle inserter is great because you can just pop that needle in there. Now, these use a flat back universal needle, and I mentioned that right at the start. That's fantastic because they're the easiest needles to get, and a universal needle is a mild ballpoint that works on just about anything. So we've got the needle in the needle inserter, and we just pop that in under there, pop it up all the way. Now the inserter means that you don't have to have the dexterity in your finger to do that, and all you got to do is then get in there and tighten that screw up. And once you've got that nice and tight, you can then just slip your needle threader down and needle's threaded. Now remember I said the left needle will always sit higher than the right needle. So now to rethread that needle, I just take that thread that I have sitting there. Remember I cut it off right back here so it wouldn't get lost. I don't have to rethread it through there. We just simply lift that foot, come down under there, up to there, into the little pigtail. It's the left needle, so we make sure the little indicator here is, or the little lever is on the left. Pull this down, use your tweezers, and hook that into there. Lift that up, and the thread is through. There's our needle threader, all threaded again. So we'll just cut that thread off, close this up, reset everything. Remember, we want to go back to normal sewing, so we push this guy forward. If you're not sure, go back to number 1 on the settings here, because this is just a guide. It doesn't change anything on the machine. It's just telling you where to set everything. I'll go back to neutral, go back to 2.5, that's forward. Get our tensions back on 4, 4, and 4. Grab a bit of fabric. Let's join this little bit of lycra. Let's imagine we're sewing a seam there, 2 pieces. We'll see what that comes out like. Now remember I said I've rethreaded the machine. So my little tip is just pop your fabric under the foot, turn the wheel by hand a couple of times. That gets it all stitching beautifully. And away we go. So let's see what a seam on a dual piece of lycra would look like. And there's a perfect stitch. So no hassle at all converting back from rolled hem to normal sewing. It's really, really easy. And above all else, these machines are smooth, they're quiet, certainly compared to pretty much any overlocker on the market. Juki is a great manufacturer. There's a good, I think it's a 2-year warranty on these, but honestly, I've sold hundreds of these guys, and they're just bulletproof. If you have any other questions on this particular model, give us a call. There is also the MO-1000, which is essentially the same machine but doesn't have the built-in display and information, and just saves you a few dollars if you'd prefer to have that. But both machines are excellent, quality's superb, results are beautiful, and of course, as always, Echidna is here to support you with any questions you have, so please check our website out to see what's going on at the moment with prices, etc. And by all means, contact us if you have any more questions at all. I hope you enjoyed that little presentation, and happy sewing. Cheers.